Welcome back to the Sherry Sylvester Show. When I pondered what to discuss with my guest today, Dr. William Inboden, I was torn. Dr. Inboden was appointed Executive Vice President and Provost of the University of Texas late last year and is playing a lead role in the implementation of Senate Bill 37, the university governance reforms that I and my colleagues here at TPPF work so hard to pass. I've got a lot of questions about that. But Dr. Inboden is also an expert on national security and the author of one of the most authoritative books on the Cold War, The Peacemaker, Ronald Reagan, the Cold War, and the World on the Brink. And he's here at a time when America is engaged in a very hot war with Iran, a war that some critics say puts us again on the brink. He is a foremost expert in this area, and his wisdom and analysis is essential at this point. Then I realized that in many ways we were talking about the same battle, the push to reform our campuses away from the ideological hegemony that has defined our universities for decades, and the conflict in the Middle East. Both are rooted in the same battle for Western values, Western civilization, life, freedom, equality. Dr. Inboden served on the National Security Council under George W. Bush and helped shape America's strategy in the aftermath of the 9/11 attack. His book on Ronald Reagan lays out the case that President Reagan's essential key that brought the Cold War to a peaceful end was moral clarity. Here in Austin, we recall that Dr. Inboden was at the LBJ School and was the director of the Clements Center for the National Security at UT. His career includes serious scholarship, real-world policymaking, and innovative leadership. And that's what intersectionality ought to mean.
Amen to that.
Coming into that. Welcome to the Sherry Sylvester Show. As I said, I want to talk about the hot war that we're in and what parallels you see or wisdom you see we can draw from what you've done on the Cold War. But first, give me a little bit of background. Stanford, Oxford, Yale. Where did you grow up?
So, Sherry, it's great to be with you. Thanks so much for that warm introduction. I'm a big fan of your work and, of course, the Texas Public Policy Foundation, and I've been looking forward to this conversation for a while. So I grew up in Tucson, Arizona. So I'm very much a son of the Southwest. I loved growing up in the desert, but surrounded by the mountains there. Had a wonderful childhood, very active in the outdoors, fishing, hunting, hiking, mountain biking. And when it's time for college, I obviously went off to Stanford and had some adventures since then, but still consider my roots to be there in Tucson.
So you were glad to get back to Texas, sounds like?
Yeah. So, coming to Austin when I first did 16 years ago now in 2010, after being over in Europe and the Middle East and the East Coast for a while, it felt like a homecoming of sorts.
Right, yeah. So. No, it's hard to live on the East Coast. I've done that too. I have definitely done that too.
Thankful for my time there, but this is home. Yeah.
Well, thank you for coming in. We are now 25 days into the war with Iran.
Yeah.
And the obvious question I want to ask you is, how is Iran the same, and how is it different than what Reagan was looking at with Russia? They both are nuclear adversaries. Iran and Russia are allies. What are you seeing when you're watching this unfold?
Yeah, well, no, so much to unpack there, and I'll try to hit some of the top themes. First, on this day we're recording right now, as you said, we are 25 days into this war with Iran. But another way of looking at it is we are 47 years into this war with Iran, or at least their declared war on the United States. Of course, started with the Iranian Revolution in 1979, taking our embassy personnel and our Marines and our CIA officers hostage, then continued with terrorist attacks throughout the Reagan administration, and basically unrelenting hostility towards the United States ever since. It has ebbed and flowed at times, but I think for that historical context, we need to remember that. And that comes to, I think, an important insight from President Reagan about his Cold War strategy, which I think can apply certainly to the conflict with Iran, as well as the challenge that we face from China right now, and to a lesser extent from Russia, which is that President Reagan fundamentally saw our our national security threats as battles of ideas. Right? There was certainly a military dimension, of course, whether it was the Soviet threat and their nuclear arsenal, or the Iranian threat that we're dealing with now, and even the threat from China. But for him, it started with understanding what our values were as Americans, as a Western society, as the leader of the free world, and he would use that concept without irony, and understanding that as different as our adversaries could be, Soviet Union atheistic, communistic, Iran now, of course, militantly Islamic. They were animated by a hostility to freedom, hostility to pluralism, to liberty of thought, to liberty of speech, to religious liberty, to an understanding of universal human dignity rather than dignity as defined by the state or by a militant regime.
Plus, they're committed to killing us and Jews.
Yeah, and this can have some pretty
mission statement.
Yeah, that can have some pretty grim manifestations in that way as well, and kind of the ends justify the means. So in his Cold War strategy was certainly about reviving and rebuilding and modernizing the American military, and making a credible threat of force. But for him, it really started with understanding the stakes in the values and the battle of ideas. And I think we're now seeing that now play out in the Middle East, right? With Iran being hostile not just to the United States, but especially to Israel. Of course, they're sworn to Israel's destruction, and to our partner states in the region. The United Arab Emirates, the Saudis. Anyone else who has chosen to align themselves with the United States has automatically become an enemy of the Iranians, and that's why it's become a region-wide war.
I think Marco Rubio understands the battle of ideas. Yeah. And one of the things about our president is he's so candid, and he has said at times he doesn't understand why Iran doesn't use their wealth to make the country prosperous. Remember when he proposed that they develop all of Gaza into casino and recreational.
Yeah.
I mean,
beach resorts.
I think for him, he's looking at wealth and prosperity as a key to unity, different than Reagan, who saw faith. And I think Rubio sees that, at least. Yeah. That Munich speech, I felt like he really articulated that we're in a war to stop the erasure. I think that was his erasure of Western civilization.
Yeah, and of course with Secretary Rubio being the son of refugees from communist Cuba, right? I mean, this is something that's been instilled in him from a young age, as an appreciation for the values of the free world, for American values, and a real kind of visceral understanding of some of these totalitarian regimes. Whether it's Cuba or China or Iran in different ways, are not as motivated by some of the same aspirations we might be in the West, and they're very willing to immiserate and impoverish their citizens, and to oppress their citizens, and to engage in vile human rights abuses, and support terrorism abroad, as we've certainly seen the Iranian regime doing for a number of decades. So Secretary Rubio, I think, gets that and has articulated that pretty strongly.
Well, and which I don't want to say that I don't think that the president doesn't understand the gravity of what we're doing. I don't think he would have moved forward if he didn't. But their style is different, particularly in reading your book. You saw religious faith as really key to Reagan's process. Yeah, that was a big part of Reagan's kind of abiding antipathy to communism. Is not just because it's a command economy and collectivism, not just because it doesn't allow political freedom, but because of its militant atheism, because of its oppression of any sort of independent religious belief, whether Christians or Jews, and that's why he was so supportive of religious dissidents. Whether it's Solidarity and the Catholic Church in Poland, or the Jewish refuseniks in the Soviet Union, or underground Baptists and evangelicals in the Soviet Union as well. For him, it was a moral imperative to support them, but also he knew that that was a real vulnerability of the Soviet government, that it was so threatened by independent religious belief that it sought to oppress it. Yeah. Let me ask you one more question about this before we get back to university talk, and that is, I want to ask you if this is the same or not. One of the things that you wrote about was personal diplomacy
Mm-hmm.
and Reagan's commitment to talking to Gorbachev.
Mm-hmm.
And that does seem to be similar to
Mm-hmm.
President Trump's approach. He
Mm-hmm.
wants that eyeball to eyeball. He talks to people all the time. Am I putting something together that really is that was quite different, or do you see that as well?
No, I mean, obviously Reagan and Trump are very, very different people, but that is a commonality. Is they both love to negotiate. They both see themselves as negotiators. Reagan, going back to his Hollywood days when he was president of the Screen Actors Guild, had loved negotiating with the Hollywood studio bosses, and he really. Even as he saw the Soviet Union as an adversary, he was fascinated by Soviet leaders as people, and he always wanted to look for, is there a possible way, even with our different systems and our enmity, to forge a human connection there, to find some common ground. Reagan wanted to keep the Cold War cold, right? I mean, he knew that a hot war, a nuclear exchange, would be catastrophic for both sides and for the world. And similarly with President Trump, and I've never met him, so I don't have any unique insights into him, but I've certainly have observed that he, even as he looks to strengthen the American military or sometimes have an assertive posture against our adversaries, he's always looking for that question of a personal connection. We saw that in the first term with his diplomacy with the North Koreans and Kim Jong-un, who's not otherwise had not had any connections with American leaders before. Another similarity is Reagan, of course, throughout the first term had wanted to meet with a Soviet leader, but as he said, they kept dying on me, right? 3 of them died in succession. President Trump made a similar crack the other day. I don't know if he knew that he was echoing Reagan, but says, I'm like, well, I'd like to negotiate with an Iranian leader, but there don't seem to be many left to negotiate with. That's true. But as vile as the Iranian regime is, this is a costly war. There's obviously debates going on right now about what the end state will be and if there's a near-term off-ramp. And I've certainly picked up, I think President Trump would like to find one if there can be some sort of negotiated settlement, but one that preserves American interests and regional stability and protects Israel's security. And that's a difficult nut to crack.
Yeah. So would you say you're optimistic? I mean, when we grew up in the Cold War, my husband was in Europe 18 years during that time, so he considers himself winning the Cold War, one of the people that won.
He was at the tip of the spear.
Absolutely. But it seems we're having a hard time convincing some of our countrymen that you can't let a jihadist have a nuclear bomb.
And especially when I think that's a line originally from Bill Parcells, but when someone tells you who they are, believe them, right? And the Iranian regime has been saying repeatedly that we want to destroy Israel and wipe it off the map, and death to America, and you cannot let a regime like that have a nuclear weapon. And we've certainly very severely degraded their capability in that respect, but they've also shown in the past a willingness to cheat on their agreements and to try to reconstitute their nuclear capabilities. So that's not something we can tolerate.
Yeah. Well, let's go to campus.
Okay.
You wrote an article for National Affairs called Restoring the Academic Social Contract. It's created a lot of buzz in terms of particularly, the University of Texas created a lot of buzz from the unique leadership there in, again, the phrase I used, unraveling the hegemony of the ideology that had kind of enveloped the universities. But what did the social contract look like before?
Yeah. No, it's a great question. I'll try to distill it pretty simply here. It's basically it was an agreement between the American people and our universities. I'm just speaking as American, our country's universities. It was forged about 125 years ago, where the American people would provide universities a number of very significant benefits, right? Favorable tax treatment for gifts and endowment growth, billions and billions and billions of dollars in research, federal government research support, of course, federal support for student loans, and then things like the legal protections of academic freedom and tenure, and then the credentialing power, where we as Americans believe that a university degree has some real value, right? And we want to invest the credibility and authority in that. And in exchange, the American people asked of universities fundamentally two things. First, to train in our teaching mission to train our students for meaningful careers and for citizenship as Americans, for the values of citizenship. And then on the research front, we produce research of value and use that will improve our economy, that'll improve our healthcare, that'll improve our lives. And in humanities and social sciences, will produce ennobling insights about the true, the good, and the beautiful. And so that was the agreement that held for a number of decades. But as we're seeing the broader turbulence and controversies about higher education these days, speaking as someone who loves American universities and is proud to lead a great one or help lead a great one in the University of Texas, I think we universities have not lived up to our side and in a lot of ways broken our side of that social contract in both our teaching mission and in parts of the research mission. And so that's our challenge to restore the trust of the American people, is to recommit ourselves to our side of that contract, of that agreement.
It's interesting. I testified at the state legislature a lot in support of the anti-DEI legislation, Senate Bill 17, and again, Senate Bill 37. And I was often, it would be me, and there were often people from the University of Texas because they could just cross the street and come over and testify. And a lot of them were members of the National Association of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Officers in Higher Education, which is a terrible long acronym that I have no idea how you pronounce. But I found their mission statement. And I wondered how it fit into what you just said about the contract. They said their mission is to advance equity and diversity in higher education by leading strategic institutional change. That doesn't sound like open inquiry. That sounds like activism.
Yeah. Oh, go ahead.
No, that's
okay.
it.
Okay. Yeah. So I'm honestly not familiar with that particular organization, but as you did describe that mission statement, yeah, a lot of that I think is inimical to certainly what President Davis and Chairman Eltife and I see as the mission of the University of Texas, which is, again, the pursuit of truth, equipping our students for citizenship, supporting free speech and free inquiry, understanding that we are a Texas university and we are an American university, and our real stakeholders are the people of Texas, the great state of Texas, and then more broadly the people of the United States. And we want to make sure that as an institution we are aligned with Texas values and with American values, and that includes diversity of thought. We want to be a welcoming place for people of all sorts of different backgrounds and different ideas. I love the model of universities as laboratories of debate and discovery and opportunities and pathways for upward mobility, right? And we certainly are committed to human equality. That's a great American principle. We know as we're celebrating the 250th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence and that great promise. But we cannot be institutions of activism in one political direction. I think that is again, an antithesis to the university mission. We certainly can't be institutions of indoctrination or squelching our students' freedom of speech and freedom of inquiry. And that's where I do think some universities have lost their way. But certainly, it's an honor to be helping lead University of Texas right now. Like I said, President Davis and I and the chairman are quite aligned on trying to recover that more traditional aspect of the university mission.
How do you fix it? And is it, in your view, is it a lot about norms and language? I mean, we're conservatives here. This is a conservative think tank. And, we spend a lot of time just making fun of the way left-leaning academics, which is a lot of them, Fire says it's 4-1 up on the 40 acres, how they talk and what they say. But do you believe that there's a basic agreement about the very reasonable things you're saying? We want our students, state of Texas invests about $50 billion in our universities. People want students who can get return on their investment, investment, be able to live prosperous lives, to be fulfilled. They're already in the greatest state, so they're way ahead.
Yeah.
But is it, I guess, is this something we can fix pretty quickly by just stopping requiring that pronouns be on everyone's email, or are the disagreements more fundamental?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. Again, there's a lot there, so I'll try to hit some of the top lines. First, I'll say that some of this is about helping to change the overall culture of universities in general, and certainly President Davis and I are focused on that at the University of Texas. But I'll say I've also been encouraged that there's a lot more support for this particular direction for the university on campus than one might have thought. And you've seen this in other political environments before. Sometimes the loudest, most radical, kind of agitated voices are not the majority. And what I've found is certainly the majority of our faculty just want to do good research, want to do good teaching, want to be able to do their jobs. They don't like feeling like they're kind of being enlisted in some sort of broader ideological or political agenda. And one of the broader points we're trying to make is higher education has become, in recent decades, way too politicized by the left, which has seen universities as vehicles for activism, and we want to depoliticize that. We want to be able to return to those pre-political virtues, like I said, of training for citizenship and open and free inquiry. And so President Davis and I try to speak out a lot about that and communicate that to campus, and we're finding again a lot of quiet support for that. A lot of faculty want to go in that direction. We're not trying to do partisan litmus tests or ask people how they vote, but rather just create an environment where they can do their jobs and do them well, but understanding it's part of that broader mission of serving the people of the state and the people of the country. But sometimes that means specific measures like SB 37 and its dissolution of the faculty council. I know that was controversial at the time, but I think it's been a tremendous success on campus. And grateful to you and Lieutenant Governor Patrick and others for the role you played in that. Because the faculty council I don't think was very representative of a lot of the rest of campus, and we still want to involve our faculty, and we welcome their advice and expertise on a lot of academic matters that we're working on. I mean, they're still an important part of the community, but I think it's been a helpful recalibration of how just more efficient and effective decision making can be made, and again restoring the university to being able to advance that broader academic mission.
What is the hardest thing that you've faced in terms of things that need to be immediately unraveled? Because there are things that are not going well. I mean, I know that there's a lot of the media has a narrative that they're running, and they watch you all really closely. They watch all the universities really closely.
I hadn't noticed. So yeah.
And what is the most difficult challenge that you've faced in you've been there 4 months?
Actually, coming up on 8 months now.
Oh,
so
8 months.
I'm almost a seasoned veteran.
I haven't been paying attention.
Yeah. It goes by quickly. So, yeah. Boy, there are no shortage of challenges. I'm trying to think of what some of the most immediate ones would be. I'll point to one that was a challenge, but I think has hopefully turned into something positive. Then I'll mention another one is our academic integrity statement that a committee of faculty that I helped lead came out with this past fall. And I hope all of our listeners and viewers have had a chance to read that, or if not, it's called the Texas Statement on Academic Integrity. Because what we realized is one reason for the loss of public trust in higher ed and a lot of the suspicion of universities in general and UT in particular was I think a lot of the American people had a sense that when there's controversial issues that would come up on race, on gender, on some other social issues, that too many universities or classes would present only one side or would almost treat it in more of an indoctrinating manner. And I think it's important for universities to be able to talk about and teach about controversial things, but to do it with balance, right? To make sure that multiple sides or all sides of the issue are being presented, especially if it's a contested matter of public concern or some controversy, and to make sure that students are free to voice dissenting opinions. And so that statement, we realized very early on that we need to help lead a campus conversation and produce a statement that will be clear that, yeah, we we cherish our academic freedom, but that brings with it responsibility, and especially in the classroom. And we're going to recommit ourselves to those particular values, especially when it comes to some of these contested issues that at least some faculty had been only presenting one side and honoring freedom of speech. That would be one. Another one that we're working through right now is our general education requirements and trying to develop a new core curriculum.
Right.
And again, we looked at it and realized that a lot of the existing general education classes were maybe not as rigorous as we would like. I'm generalizing here. Some of them are very good, but you understand. But looking at the whole body, there were just too many that weren't as rigorous or weren't even fulfilling the requirements, right? I mean, the U.S. history requirement is you have to teach a broad survey about the main values and principles and events in American history, and too many classes under that particular requirement were much more narrow and specialized, and frankly become very, very ideological. So recalibrating that of trying to not just do away with the old system, which very few people on campus have many good things to say about. There's kind of a broad consensus the old system is not working well, but come in with positive new model of that's going to create a more common learning experience for all UT students, including real grounding in the principles and the great texts of Western civilization and the American constitutional order. Just no matter what their major is going to be, equipping them for citizenship, right? To understand what it means to be a Texan, what it means to be an American.
Well, to wrap up here, we just have a couple of minutes, but I want to ask you, I know you've been in universities all over the country, and Senate Bill 37 in particular, and Texas in general, is kind of one of the leaders in higher education reform. How do you think it's playing so far, what we're trying to do here? Is there blowback or people going? I know the Senate Bill 37, did I just say this? The Manhattan Institute has made it a model piece of legislation. It's been picked up by several states.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, no, I'm glad you asked this question. And I first got to say that, President Davis and I are just very focused on doing our jobs at the University of Texas. And as he's often pointed out, and I'm prone to quoting him on this, too often academics can think that if we say something, we've done something. And what we really want to do is show more than tell, right? So obviously I'm sharing our message here, so I'm talking about this. But at the end of the day, we're really focused on, building the best possible University of Texas we can. However, I do hear regularly from other leaders in higher ed across the country and journalists, and it is just a fact that people are watching closely what's going on here in Texas. I won't mention particular names or universities, but I've spoken in the last few weeks with leaders of some very elite private and public universities on the East Coast and West Coast, and I've actually been encouraged. They're saying, look, we're watching what you guys are doing at UT, and we like it. We're cheering you on, and if you're able to make some progress in these areas, it will hopefully have a demonstration effect and can provide encouragement and maybe even a model for them. Again, hesitate to say that too much because it sounds too much like, hey, everybody, look at us, right?
Mission accomplished.
Yeah, mission accomplished. No, we're just at the beginning here, but whether we like it or not or realize it or not, yeah, the eyes of the country are upon us, and that makes it all the more of a burden and stewardship that we do our best and that we get this right.
So glad you're there. So glad you're here at this very interesting time. Thank you so much for coming, and thank you all for joining us. You can subscribe to the Sherry Sylvester Show at Apple or Spotify or wherever you get your podcasts. If you'd like to receive my weekly newsletter, Winners and Losers, as well as my regular op-eds, you can sign up at the TPPF website, www.texaspolicy.com/9th in Congress. Follow me on X at Sylvester1630 and on Substack. Everything I write is also there. See you next time.